Hello, guys. Welcome you all to the Insights into Books podcast, where we discuss insights of significant books, which changes our lives. But before we start the discussion on today's book, kindly subscribe or follow Insights into Books for regular updates. With the hope that you have subscribed, let's start today's discussion.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into, well, something fascinating, the hidden forces behind how things, ideas, trends, even behavior suddenly explode, just become massive. And our guide for this is a really groundbreaking concept, one that's definitely shaped how we understand social change. Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point. So our mission, I guess, is to unpack this framework, understand how it works, and see how it shines a light on everything from, say, fashion fads to crime waves, and maybe even Gladwell's own thinking as it evolved.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. We see this all the time, don't we? Something just takes off. A song, a style, a movement. You kind of scratch your head wondering, how did that happen so fast? And this deep dive, it's not just about, marketing gimmicks or fleeting trends. It's deeper. It's about understanding basic human behavior, the subtle things that drive these big shifts in society. And Gladwell's core idea, the sort of analogy running through the whole thing, is that these social things spread, well, kind of like viruses, like epidemics.
That virus analogy, it's really powerful, isn't it? The idea that society can catch an idea, like you'd catch a cold. So let's get right into it then, the core concept. What exactly is a tipping point? We hear that phrase all the time now, but what did Gladwell really mean by it?
Right. So at its heart, a tipping point is that critical moment. It's a threshold, like a boiling point for water, maybe.
Right.
It's when a small change, often something that seems totally insignificant, leads to this sudden, really dramatic, widespread shift. An idea, a trend, a social behavior, it just spreads like wildfire. And the key thing is, it's abrupt. It's not gradual, which is how we normally think big changes happen, right? We expect slow, steady progress.
Yeah, exactly. We think things build up slowly over time.
But this is different. It's more like an explosion, almost overnight. Think about a real epidemic, a flu outbreak or something. It smolders for a bit, maybe, then bam, it hits a critical point, and suddenly it's everywhere. It's that non-linear, sort of exponential leap that defines it.
That really does challenge our intuition. We see graphs in our head, steady lines going up or down, progress, decline, all very orderly. But Gladwell's saying it's more like flipping a switch, an instant transformation. How hard is it for us just naturally to grasp that idea of sudden, nonlinear change?
Oh, it's incredibly hard. Our brains aren't really wired for exponential growth. We think linearly. And that's why Gladwell uses such vivid analogies, I think, to make it feel more real. His best one, probably, is the rain turning to snow. Think about temperature. The difference between, say, 34 degrees Fahrenheit and 31 degrees. It doesn't feel that much colder, does it? Not really more than the difference between 37 and 34. But when that same 3-degree drop happens right at the critical threshold, 32 degrees, freezing point suddenly, rain isn't rain anymore, it's snow. A tiny temperature shift, but a completely different dramatic outcome.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. The same amount of change has a totally different effect depending on where it happens.
Exactly. Or picture a balance beam, like a seesaw. You can push down on one side, below the tipping point, and maybe it moves a little, incremental results. But push just a tiny bit past that invisible balance point, that fulcrum, and whoosh, the whole thing flips. The results don't just increase, they explode. It's like that old math problem, folding a piece of paper.
Oh yeah, fold it enough times and it reaches the moon or something crazy.
Right. Because each fold doubles the thickness. It's geometric progression. Things move incredibly fast once you hit that critical point. It seems impossible, but mathematically, that's how epidemics, social or otherwise, can work once they tip.
So it's not just the size of the change, but the nature of it, sudden, explosive, often triggered by something really subtle. And Gladwell breaks this down further, right? He talks about the core traits that all these social epidemics seem to share.
He does, yeah. He boils it down to 3 main characteristics that you typically see. First, there's contagiousness. It's not just that ideas can spread, but some ideas or behaviors or products, they had this built-in quality, this stickiness maybe. Yeah. Or they're pushed by the right people. They become almost irresistible, like a social reflex. You see it everywhere, right? A catchy song sweeps through a school, or even just a yawn going around a room. It's infectious.
Okay, contagiousness. What's the second trait?
The second is that little causes lead to big effects. This is where he really pushes against conventional thinking. He shows how tiny adjustments, maybe a slight change in how you phrase a message, or one strategic introduction, or a subtle shift in the environment, these can snowball. They can lead to huge shifts in popularity or behavior, way bigger than you'd ever expect from the initial small input. It's the butterfly effect, but for social stuff.
Right. The idea that a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil can cause a tornado in Texas, though maybe less dramatic here.
Hopefully less dramatic, but the principle holds.
Yeah.
Small inputs, disproportionate outputs. And third, and this is maybe the most defining feature, is sudden change. Like we said, these aren't slow burns. They're not linear progressions. A real tipping point is marked by that dramatic, almost overnight explosion. One day something's niche, known only to a few. The next day, seemingly, everyone's talking about it, everyone's doing it. It's that sharp acceleration, that nonlinear jump that tells you an epidemic is truly tipped.
That's a really clear framework. Contagiousness, little causes having big effects, and sudden change. But Gladwell doesn't just describe it right. He actually offers a kind of toolkit, principles that, if you understand them, might let you not just explain these things, but maybe even deliberately create positive epidemics. He calls them the law of the few, the stickiness factor, and the power of context.
Precisely. You can think of these three rules as the main levers, the agents of change. They're the specific areas where a small, well-aimed push can knock a system off balance and start that tipping process. It's about figuring out where to apply your effort for the biggest bang for your buck, knowing that focusing on one of these areas can give you those disproportionately huge results.
Okay, let's dive into the first one. The law of the few. This immediately makes me think of the Pareto principle, that 80-20 rule where like 20% of the people do 80% of the work or 20% of customers generate 80% of revenue. Is Gladwell saying something similar here, that a small group is doing most of the heavy lifting and spreading trends?
That's a very sharp connection. Yes, he strongly suggests that this kind of disproportionate influence is a key feature. The exact 80-20 ratio might wiggle a bit, but the core idea is solid. The success of a social epidemic relies heavily, maybe even entirely, on a handful of people. These aren't just average people. They have specific, quite rare social gifts. It's not like everyone has an equal say in what catches on. It's more like an oligarchy of influence, run by a few key types. And he identifies three distinct types, three archetypes of these influencers, each playing a different but crucial role.
Okay, 3 types of key people. Who are they?
First up, we have the connectors. These people are, well, exactly what they sound like. They are the social glue of society. They're individuals who just know tons of people. Not just a lot, but an exceptional number, often spanning incredibly diverse groups and subcultures. Think of them as social hubs, bridging communities that otherwise wouldn't interact. They just have this amazing knack for making friends and acquaintances. Gladwell attributes it to a mix of things. Genuine curiosity about others, self-confidence, natural sociability, maybe just a lot of energy, their main function, linking us up with the world, making introductions, spreading information rapidly across different circles.
What's really interesting there is his point about how they connect people. He talks about weak ties being more important than strong ones. Can you unpack that a bit? It seems counterintuitive.
It does seem counterintuitive, doesn't it? We naturally value our close friends, our strong ties. But Gladwell, building on sociological research, points out that our close friends often travel in the same circles we do. They know the same people, read the same things, hear the same news. So information within that close circle tends to be redundant. Weak ties, though those are your acquaintances, people you know maybe casually from different walks of life, they're the bridges to new information, different social worlds. A connector who knows, say, a teacher, a tech CEO, an artist, and a plumber can cross-pollinate ideas and opportunities between those otherwise separate worlds. They introduce people who would never meet otherwise. This massively increases the reach and, crucially, the novelty of an idea. It's like, for a virus to become a pandemic, it needs to jump between different populations. Connectors are the ones who facilitate those jumps for social epidemics.
Can you give an example of a connector in action?
The classic example Gladwell uses is Carl Revere's Midnight Ride. You know the story. The British are coming. What's fascinating is that another man, William Dawes, rode the same night with the exact same urgent message through similar territory. But Revere's ride successfully mobilized the militias, while Dawes had much less impact. Why? Gladwell argues it's because Revere was an exceptional connector. He wasn't just a silversmith. He was deeply involved in numerous clubs, organizations, and social circles across Boston artisans, merchants, politicians, laborers. He knew everyone, and more importantly, he knew who the key people were in each town and how to talk to them to get them to act. Dawes apparently lacked that vast, diverse network. Other examples he mentions are people like a Dallas businessman named Roger Horchow or a Chicagoan named Lois Weisberg, who just had this incredible, almost effortless talent for bringing diverse people together. Even Stanley Milgram's 6 Degrees of Separation experiments, the precursor to the Kevin Bacon game.
Right, the idea that we're all connected by just a few steps.
Exactly. Those experiments hinted that the reason the chains were so short wasn't just that everyone knew someone, but that a few highly connected individuals, these connectors or hubs, acted as shortcuts, linking vast numbers of people together. They make the world feel smaller.
Okay, so connectors are the networkers, the hubs. Who's the second type in the law of the few?
The second type are the Mavens. This is a Yiddish word meaning someone who accumulates knowledge. Mavens are the information specialists. They're the people who just love to soak up information, especially about the marketplace products, prices, deals. They're like walking databanks. But crucially, they're not just hoarding this knowledge. They are driven, almost compelled to share it. Gladwell calls them pathologically helpful. Their motivation isn't usually persuasion or selling something. It's a genuine desire to educate and help others make informed choices. So their role is to provide the message. They have the inside scoop, the details, the comparisons, and they're trusted sources because people know they aren't trying to push an agenda, just share what they know. They kind of keep the marketplace honest.
So they're not necessarily trying to convince you, just inform you, like the ultimate consumer watchdog, but maybe more proactive.
Exactly. They're not primarily persuaders, they're educators. Their power comes from knowledge and trust. Think about who you ask when you need advice on a big purchase, like a car or a computer. You probably go to that friend who's obsessed with that topic, who's done all the research, read all the reviews.
Yeah, my friend Dave with electronics, he knows everything.
Dave sounds like a classic Maven. Gladwell uses the example of a guy named Mark Alpert, a finance expert who became obsessed with finding the best deals on everything, from electronics to groceries. He'd spend hours researching, comparing, then happily share his findings with anyone who asked, just because he enjoyed the process and wanted to help people save money or get better quality. And businesses, smart ones anyway, try to find these people. Gladwell talks about Maven traps. Like, why would a company put a toll-free 1-800 number on a simple product like Ivory soap?
Huh. I never thought about that. Who would call about soap?
A Maven might. Someone who wants to know the exact pH balance, or suggest an improvement, or maybe even point out a tiny inaccuracy on the packaging. It's a way for companies to identify these highly engaged, knowledgeable, and potentially influential customers. They're invaluable for feedback, and also because their recommendations carry real weight in their circles. They give the message credibility.
Okay, connectors spread the word, Mavens provide the trustworthy info. Who's the third piece of this few puzzle?
The third types are the salesmen. These are the persuaders. They're the people with the charisma, the energy, the subtle nonverbal cues, the negotiation skills, to actually convince people to adopt an idea or behavior, especially when those people are initially skeptical or undecided. Psychologists sometimes call them senders because they're incredibly good at expressing emotions and having those emotions infect others. They can transmit enthusiasm, urgency, trust, often without you even realizing how they're doing it. Their role isn't necessarily knowing the most people, like connectors, or the most information, like Mavens, but converting people, turning interest into action. Their power often lies less in logical arguments and more in that emotional connection, that ability to build rapport and trust quickly.
That's fascinating, this idea of emotional contagion, that someone's energy or enthusiasm can literally rub off on you and make you more receptive to their message, maybe even bypassing your critical thinking a bit.
It absolutely can. Gladwell talks about how emotion can work outside in. If a salesman, through their demeanor, their smile, their energy, can make you smile or feel more positive, that can actually change your internal state, making you feel happier and more open to whatever they're suggesting. It's often subconscious. Skilled salesmen, whether they know the theory or not, are masters at this kind of nonverbal synchronization. They mirror posture, match vocal tones, create a sense of intimacy and trust that makes their message incredibly persuasive.
Are there ethical considerations there? I mean, is it manipulation?
Well, that's always a question with persuasion, isn't it? Is the salesman genuinely enthusiastic about something they believe in, or are they just skilled at triggering responses? Gladwell's focus is more on the mechanism, how this persuasive power works, to tip an idea. He gives examples like a highly successful California businessman named Tom Gow, whose clients trusted him implicitly, not just for his financial advice, but for his reassuring, confidence-inspiring manner. Or think of charismatic leaders, or even news anchors like Peter Jennings, who Gladwell mentions people who just project an aura of credibility and trustworthiness that makes you want to believe them. So you need all three. The connectors to spread the message widely, the Mavens to provide the substance and credibility, and the salesman to actually convince people, to close the deal, so to speak, and get them to act. Without all three, an idea might flutter, but it probably won't tip into a true epidemic.
Okay, that law of the few makes a lot of sense. Identifying the right messengers is critical. But what about the message itself? What makes an idea sticky? What makes it memorable and compelling enough that people want to pay attention, remember it, and pass it on? This brings us to Gladwell's second rule, right? The stickiness factor.
Exactly. The stickiness factor is all about the message itself. It's the quality inherent in an idea, a product, a story that makes it memorable, impactful, and, well, sticky. It's what makes it lodge in your brain and compels you to think about it, act on it, or share it. And again, Gladwell stresses that achieving stickiness often isn't about huge, radical changes to the content. It's frequently about small, subtle tweaks in how the information is presented, structured, or framed. Little changes can have a massive impact on how much an idea resonates and endures. It's about optimizing the message for maximum contagion.
I remember he used some really great examples from children's television to illustrate this. It seems like an area where stickiness is absolutely crucial. You lose a kid's attention, you've lost them completely.
Absolutely. Children's TV is probably the ultimate testing ground for stickiness. Their attention spans are short, and they don't politely pretend to be interested if they're bored or confused. Take Sesame Street. It was revolutionary. The core insight was brilliant for its time. Education doesn't have to be boring. If you can capture and hold a child's attention, you can teach them things. The researchers behind the show, people like Gerald Lesser, did incredible work figuring out what kept kids watching. They discovered that simply being loud or fast-paced wasn't enough. Kids actually paid more attention when they understood what was happening. They also found that blending fantasy and reality, like having Muppets interact naturally with human actors on a realistic street, was incredibly engaging. They meticulously tested segments, watching kids' eye movements, seeing when they looked away. Usually it was when they got confused, so they refined everything, pacing, repetition, clarity, to make the educational content as sticky as possible.
And then Blue's Clues came along and took it even further, didn't it? How did they achieve even more stickiness?
They did. Blue's Clues targeted a slightly younger audience, primarily preschoolers, and its creators learned even more lessons from Sesame Street's experience. They realized that for very young children, predictability and repetition are actually more engaging than constant novelty. Preschoolers are trying to make sense of the world. They crave understanding. So Blue's Clues built its stickiness around a strong narrative structure, deliberate repetition of concepts and phrases within an episode and across episodes, and direct participation. The host, Steve or Joe, would ask questions directly to the camera, pausing for the child to answer. This created a sense of interaction and mastery. Kids felt smart because they could predict what was coming next and participate in solving the puzzle. Simple elements like the recurring mealtime song or the handy-dandy notebook became predictable, comforting rituals. It wasn't just about watching. It was about participating in a familiar, understandable game. That made it incredibly sticky for that age group.
It's amazing how much psychology goes into crafting something seemingly simple, like a kid's show. Those subtle changes in structure and pacing had a huge impact. What about examples outside of TV?
Oh, definitely. Gladwell points to the old Winston cigarette slogan. Winston tastes good like a cigarette should. Grammatically, it should be as a cigarette should.
Right, using like as a conjunction was considered wrong then. Still is, by some.
Exactly. And that slight grammatical error wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. It created a tiny bit of buzz, a small controversy. People noticed it, talked about it. That little bit of wrongness made the slogan stand out, made it memorable, made it sticky. It gave the brand a slightly rebellious edge and helped it become hugely popular. A subtle tweak with a big impact.
A deliberately placed mistake. Clever. Any others?
He also delves into the world of direct mail, specifically the work of Lester Wunderman, a real pioneer. Wunderman understood stickiness intuitively, long before the term was coined. He created campaigns, like the famous Gold Box offer for the Columbia House Record Club, that were masters of grabbing attention and prompting action. His insight was that in the flood of mail people received, you needed something simple, clear, and compelling. The Gold Box campaign often used simple, uncluttered designs. The gold box itself, sometimes a literal box printed on the envelope or insert, was a tangible, intriguing visual element. It screamed value or special offer before you even read the text. Repetition of the key offer, clear instructions, maybe a sense of urgency, these elements combined to make the message cut through the clutter and stick, driving huge response rates. It shows stickiness isn't just about words, it's about presentation, psychology, making the message easy to grasp and act upon. And this whole idea of stickiness becomes even more critical today with what Gladwell called the clutter problem. We're just drowning in information, aren't we? Ads, emails, social media feeds, news alerts, endless noise.
Totally. Information overload is real.
So for any message to actually tip today, it has to be sticky. It needs that special something, whether it's simplicity, unexpectedness, emotion, credibility, a great story, something that makes it punch through the noise and lodge itself in people's minds. Otherwise, it just gets lost in the static. Making your message memorable is more vital and maybe harder than ever.
Okay, so we have the right messengers, the few. We have a message crafted to be memorable, the stickiness factor. What's the third leg of the stool? This leads us to the power of context, which sounds like it's about the environment, the situation itself. How much does our surrounding world shape whether something tips?
Immensely. This is arguably one of Gladwell's most powerful and perhaps controversial arguments. The power of context says that human behavior is incredibly sensitive to the environment, to the conditions and circumstances of the time and place. Often, he argues, the context matters more than the inherent qualities of the message or the specific skills of the messenger. Small changes in our immediate surroundings can radically alter how we behave and whether an epidemic takes hold. The most famous illustration he uses for this is the broken windows theory.
Right, you mentioned this earlier, the idea that visible signs of disorder like graffiti or broken windows can actually encourage more serious crime.
Exactly. The theory, developed by criminologists James Q. Wilson and George Kelling, proposed that these small signs of decay signal that social controls are weak, that no one cares, basically. This creates an environment where more serious crime feels less risky, more permissible. Gladwell initially used this theory to help explain the dramatic, almost unbelievable drop in crime in New York City during the 1990s. The city, under Mayor Giuliani and Police Commissioner Bratton, famously cracked down on minor offenses, cleaning graffiti off subway cars, arresting turnstile jumpers, clearing out the squeegee men. The argument Gladwell presented was that by fixing the broken windows, by changing the context of the city's public spaces, they created a tipping point where the environment itself began to discourage crime, leading to the huge drop in serious offenses like murder and robbery. It was about signaling that order had been restored.
It's a compelling narrative, fix the small things and the big things follow. But you also mentioned this is where Gladwell later had some second thoughts, his mea culpa.
Yes, and this is crucial for understanding the theory in Gladwell's own intellectual journey. Years later, reflecting on the book, he publicly stated that he felt his initial explanation, relying so heavily on broken windows, was incomplete, perhaps even wrong in its emphasis. What really prompted this reconsideration was what happened after the widespread use of stop-and-frisk policing in New York City was drastically curtailed by the Floyd v. City of New York court decision in 2013. Stop-and-frisk was, in many ways, the practical application of broken windows intervening aggressively on minor suspicions or infractions.
Okay, so the policy changed based on the court ruling.
Right. The number of stops plummeted from nearly 700,000 in 2011 down to less than 50,000 after 2013. Now, the prediction from many officials, pundits, even the judge, was dire. Crime would inevitably soar back up without this proactive policing strategy, but it didn't. In fact, crime in New York City continued to fall, even more sharply in some categories. By 2019, the city was statistically one of the safest large cities in the world. This natural experiment, as Gladwell called it, directly contradicted the idea that simply cracking down on minor disorder via policies like stop and frisk was the primary driver of the crime decline.
So what was the new conclusion then?
Gladwell concluded that his initial take was too simplistic. It wasn't necessarily the indiscriminate focus on minor infractions, but perhaps more targeted, intelligent and thoughtful and selective application of police authority that made the difference. He also candidly acknowledged that his original perspective might have been colored by his own experience living in relatively safe Manhattan and didn't fully account for the negative impacts and experiences of communities, particularly in the Bronx or Brooklyn, that bore the brunt of stop-and-frisk policing. It led him to emphasize that when writers present ideas, they should frame them as their current understanding, what I believe happened now, acknowledging that knowledge evolves rather than presenting theories as the final definitive word. It was a remarkable public reflection on the limits of a powerful idea.
That's incredibly important context. So while the specific NYC broken windows example is complex and debated, the underlying principle of context influencing behavior still holds. Are there other examples?
Oh, absolutely. The power of situational cues is demonstrated in numerous psychological studies. There's the famous Good Samaritan experiment from the 1970s. Researchers had seminary students prepare a sermon on the parable of the Good Samaritan. Then, On their way to deliver the sermon, they had them encounter a man slumped in an alleyway, clearly in distress. The key variable was telling some students they were running late, while others were told they had plenty of time. The results were stark. The students who were told they were late were far, far less likely to stop and help the man, even though they were literally about to preach about helping strangers. A tiny situational factor, being in a hurry, completely overrode their moral training and intentions.
Wow, that's quite revealing.
Isn't it? It shows how powerfully our immediate circumstances can dictate our actions, regardless of our character or beliefs. And then there's the infamous Stanford prison experiment. Philip Zimbardo created a mock prison environment and assigned college students to roles as either guards or prisoners. Within days, the situation devolved dramatically. The guards became authoritarian, some even abusive. The prisoners became passive, stressed, and some experienced emotional breakdowns. The experiment had to be shut down after only 6 days because the context, the assigned roles and environment had such a radical and disturbing effect on the participants' behavior. It powerfully demonstrated that, as Gladwell puts it, intense situations could lead to intense behaviors. The environment overwhelmed individual personalities.
These examples really force you to question how much of our behavior is truly driven by our internal character versus the external situation.
Exactly. And Gladwell ties this to a common psychological bias called the fundamental attribution error. This is our tendency, when looking at other people's behavior, to overestimate the importance of their personality or disposition. He's just a lazy person, and underestimate the power of the situation or context. Maybe he's facing overwhelming external pressures. We prefer simple internal explanations for why people do what they do. It's easier to blame character than to analyze complex environmental factors. But Gladwell argues we do this at our peril, often missing the real drivers of behavior, which are frequently rooted in context. He urges us to look beyond the individual and consider the powerful, often invisible influence of their surroundings.
So context isn't just about immediate physical surroundings or fleeting situations, but also maybe the social environment, like the size or structure of groups we're in.
Precisely. Context also encompasses group dynamics. And here, Gladwell introduces another fascinating concept. The rule of 1/70, often called Dunbar's number, after the anthropologist Robin Dunbar, who proposed it. Dunbar's research suggested there's a cognitive limit to the number of people with whom one can maintain stable social relationships where you know who each person is and how they relate to every other person. That number, he argued, is roughly 150.
150, that seems specific.
It does, but Dunbar found evidence for it across various human societies and even primate groups. Once a group grows much larger than 150, he argued, it tends to fracture. Cohesion, trust, mutual understanding, and the ability to cooperate effectively without formal rules and strict hierarchies start to break down. People can't keep track of everyone in their relationships anymore. You start needing more formal structures, or the group naturally splinters into smaller clans.
So for an idea or behavior to really spread effectively within a group, maybe that group needs to be small enough for those strong social bonds to work their magic, below that 150 threshold.
That's exactly the implication Gladwell draws. The size of the group itself is a critical part of the context. He gives the example of the Hutterites, a religious group known for their communal living. Historically, when a Hutterite colony grows close to that 150 mark, they deliberately split it into two. They do this consciously to preserve the intimacy, social harmony, and effectiveness that comes from everyone knowing everyone else well. Another famous example is the company W.L. Gore and Associates, the makers of Gore-Tex. They intentionally keep their manufacturing plants and office buildings relatively small, capping them at around 150 employees. They believe this fosters better communication, stronger internal bonds, shared knowledge, and ultimately faster innovation, because people can collaborate more easily and informally within that smaller, more cohesive context. Gladwell even suggests that the runaway success of the novel Divine Secrets of the Ya-Ya Sisterhood was partly fueled by the power of context specifically, the fact that it was often read and discussed in small, intimate book clubs, usually well under the 150 limit. These close-knit groups amplified the book's emotional message and helped it spread virally. So, maintaining an optimal group size seems crucial for nurturing a contagious movement or idea.
Okay, this framework, the law of the few, the stickiness factor, and the power of context, feels really robust. We've got the messengers, the message, and the environment. Let's pull it all together now. How do these three rules actually work in concert in some of the real-world examples Gladwell uses?
Right. The magic really happens when all three align. Let's look again at the Hush Puppies comeback. This is a great positive example. Remember, Early 90s, the shoes were basically dead, selling maybe 30,000 pairs a year.
Yeah, totally uncool dad shoes, so what happened?
The law of the few kicked in, but in an unexpected way. A tiny handful of fashion-forward kids in very specific neighborhoods in New York Soho, the East Village, started wearing them ironically, because they were so uncool. These kids were the initial unwitting salesmen, perhaps, or maybe mavens identifying an anti-trend. Then, other fashion mavens noticed. But the real tipping point came when a couple of influential fashion designers spotted this micro-trend among these kids. These designers acted as crucial connectors. By featuring hush puppies in their high-fashion runway shows, they broadcast the image to a massive audience, journalists, buyers, other designers. Suddenly, the shoes were visible in a completely new, desirable context. The power of context here was huge. It wasn't just any kids wearing them, it was cool kids in the heart of New York's trend-setting downtown scene. That specific environment gave the act meaning. And the runway shows changed the context again, elevating the shoes from ironic curiosity to high-fashion statement. Then celebrities and other influencers jumped on board, acting as powerful salesmen, making the shoes mainstream. The stickiness factor. Maybe it was the sheer unexpectedness, the retro appeal, the comfort, or just the story itself, the comeback of the underdog shoe. All three factors clicked, and the result, sales exploded. 430,000 pairs in '95, quadrupling again the next year. A near-dead brand tipped back into massive popularity because the right people adopted it in the right context, and the idea itself became sticky.
That's a perfect storm.
Yeah.
What about Airwalk sneakers? You mentioned them earlier, too. How did they manage their rise from a niche skate brand?
Airwalk is interesting because they seem to have understood these principles, perhaps implicitly, and applied them strategically. They started as an authentic skate and snowboard brand. To go mainstream without selling out, they hired a smart ad agency. This agency acted like anthropologists. They went out and identified the real trendsetters, the innovators in various youth subcultures, skating, surfing, music scenes. These were the mavens and early connectors. Airwalk then targeted these specific few with edgy, almost cryptic ads placed in obscure magazines or locations only these kids would see. The ads didn't scream, "Buy Airwalk." They hinted at belonging, at being in the know. This created a sticky message for the target group: exclusive, authentic, cool. The power of context was crucial, reaching these influencers in their own environment, speaking their language. Then, as the brand gained traction within these subcultures, Airwalk carefully translated the ideas to a broader audience. Gladwell describes a kind of rumor process: make the message slightly ambiguous, let the cool kids fill in the blanks, and then amplify it. They essentially used the law of the few, targeting influencers, the stickiness factor, creating intriguing, authentic messages, and the power of context, understanding subcultures and timing the mainstream push, to engineer their own tipping point from niche to mass market success.
So it shows you can potentially engineer these things if you understand the rules. But as we discussed, it's not always about positive trends like cool shoes. How do these same rules explain negative epidemics? You mentioned the Baltimore syphilis outbreak.
Right, a much darker example, but the mechanics are disturbingly similar. Mid-90s Baltimore saw a sudden, shocking spike in syphilis cases after years of relative control. Gladwell argues all three rules collided: the law of the few. Two large, run-down public housing projects were demolished. This displaced hundreds of residents, including individuals who were infected with syphilis and who were likely connectors within their tightly knit social networks. Scattering these individuals across the city broke down the geographical containment of the disease, spreading it to new networks and communities. The stickiness factor. At the same time, budget cuts hit public health clinics hard. Fewer staff, reduced hours. This meant people diagnosed with syphilis often had to wait weeks, sometimes longer, for treatment. Syphilis is curable, but during that extended waiting period, infected individuals remained contagious. The disease literally became stickier. It had more time to spread from each infected person because treatment was delayed. The power of context. Compounding all this was the rise of crack cocaine use in the city. The drug trade drew people into specific high-risk neighborhoods, increasing social mixing and often leading to risky sexual behavior associated with drug use or trading sex for drugs. This changed the environment, increasing opportunities for the disease to transmit. So you had key individuals dispersed, the disease itself made more infectious by delayed treatment, and environmental context that facilitated transmission. A tragic convergence that turned a manageable problem into a full-blown epidemic.
That's sobering. It shows how interconnected these factors are and how seemingly unrelated policy decisions like housing or clinic funding can have unexpected public health consequences. What about teenage smoking? That's another persistent issue.
Teenage smoking is another complex one where these rules apply. For years, despite massive public health campaigns detailing the dangers, smoking rates among teens remained stubbornly high, behaving like an epidemic. The law of the few is clearly visible. Certain influential teenagers, the cool kids, often act as powerful salesmen. Their adoption of smoking makes it seem desirable, rebellious, sophisticated, part of a social identity. They make smoking contagious not just as a habit, but as a social statement. The stickiness factor is multi-layered. Obviously, nicotine is highly chemically addictive. That's a powerful biological stickiness. Once started, it's hard to stop. But Gladwell also points to psychological stickiness, the perceived coolness, the ritual, the association with fitting in or defying authority. He even touches on the correlation between smoking and depression in teens, suggesting nicotine might be sticky for some because it temporarily alleviates negative feelings. The power of context comes from the peer group environment. If smoking is normalized or even valued within a particular social circle, the pressure to conform or the desire to emulate the salesman becomes immense. Gladwell's suggestion here is interesting. He argues that trying to change the salesman, making cool kids uncool, is really hard, maybe impossible. Adult interventions might even backfire, making smoking seem more alluringly forbidden. So maybe, he posits, we should focus on the stickiness factor. What if you reduce nicotine levels in cigarettes below the addictive threshold? Or what if you address the underlying reasons teens start, like depression or anxiety, changing the context that makes smoking appealing in the first place?
Attack the addiction itself or the reasons behind it rather than just saying don't do it. That's a different angle. This framework also seems applicable to even more disturbing phenomena, like school shootings.
Tragically, yes. Gladwell suggests that the Columbine High School massacre in 1999 acted as a horrifying kind of tipping point. It didn't invent school violence, of course, but it seemed to codify it, to create a specific terrifying script, particularly within certain isolated or troubled adolescent subcultures. In this view, Columbine provided a sticky narrative and a set of actions that resonated with other alienated, bullied, or deeply disturbed youths. The intense media coverage, while necessary, may have inadvertently amplified the stickiness, providing details that others could latch onto. The law of the few might apply to the way this narrative spread within specific online communities or isolated peer groups, where such extreme ideas could fester without mainstream checks. The power of context relates to the often insular nature of adolescent worlds, where peer influence is paramount, and extreme behaviors can sometimes spread like a private language, invisible to adults until it's too late. It suggests that Columbine gave a terrible kind of permission or blueprint for subsequent acts within these specific contexts.
And he saw a similar pattern with teen suicide in Micronesia.
Yes, he discusses an epidemic of youth suicide on certain Micronesia islands. It appeared to be driven by a series of high-profile suicides acting as tipping points. The initial highly publicized suicides seemed to provide a detailed script, a method, a rationale, a way of expressing despair that became tragically sticky for other vulnerable young people in that specific cultural context. The first few acts, committed by individuals who might be seen as embodying certain struggles, law of the few, effectively gave permission or license to copy to others facing similar feelings of hopelessness within that tightly knit community. It highlights the terrible contagiousness of certain behaviors, especially suicide, within specific subcultures where a narrative takes hold and tips. These examples show the framework isn't just about fads. It can illuminate the spread of profound social problems, too.
It's clear the tipping point offered a powerful, accessible way to think about these complex dynamics. It became a huge bestseller, influenced business, marketing, public health. Its vocabulary entered everyday language. But no influential idea goes unchallenged. How is the book received critically? And maybe more importantly, how has the conversation around it and Gladwell's own views evolved since it came out?
You're right, its impact was massive, but so was the critical discussion. Several common themes emerged in critiques. One was oversimplification. Critics argued that boiling down complex social phenomena to just 3 neat rules, while appealing, might gloss over nuances, historical factors, economic forces, and randomness that also play huge roles. Real life is messy, they'd say, and maybe not always reducible to these clean categories. Another related critique concerned the evidence. Many of the case studies are compelling narratives, anecdotes really, rather than rigorous, controlled scientific experiments. Critics questioned whether the evidence was strong enough to definitively prove the causal links Gladwell proposed. They sometimes labeled him a brilliant storyteller and synthesizer of ideas, a pop science writer, rather than a primary researcher, suggesting he sometimes overstates the certainty of his conclusions based on the available data.
So more of a journalist weaving compelling stories around research than a scientist proving theorems.
That's a common way it's framed, yes.
Yeah.
which isn't necessarily a dismissal. His ability to make complex ideas accessible is a huge strength. But it raises questions about the scientific robustness for some critics. And this ties back to Gladwell's own reflections, particularly on broken windows. His willingness to publicly say, essentially, okay, I didn't get that quite right, or the story is more complicated than I initially presented, is quite remarkable.
Tell us more about that mea culpa again. It really centered on the link between broken windows policing and the NYC crime drop, driven by the Floyd v. City of New York case.
Exactly. That case, ending widespread stop and frisk in 2013, created that crucial natural experiment. Remember, the prediction was chaos, soaring crime, but the reality was the opposite crime kept falling, even faster. This forced Gladwell and many others to reconsider. Was the aggressive policing of minor offenses really the key driver, or was it something else? Gladwell concluded his earlier certainty was misplaced. He suggested it was likely more about intelligent and thoughtful and selective application of police authority, not just indiscriminate stops. And he importantly acknowledged the perspective issue, how the policy felt very different depending on whether you lived in a heavily policed neighborhood in Brooklyn or a safer one in Manhattan. His point about writers needing to present ideas as current beliefs, open to revision, what I believe happened now, rather than closed cases, is a powerful lesson in intellectual humility that came directly from grappling with the criticisms and new evidence surrounding one of his own key examples.
That really adds depth to understanding the book. It's not just the original text, but the ongoing conversation around it. Were there other scientific challenges to his core ideas, like the law of the few?
Yes, there were. Duncan Watts, a network scientist, conducted a very large-scale digital replication of Milgram's small world experiment, the 6 degrees of separation idea. He used email chains involving tens of thousands of people. While he confirmed the small world phenomenon, average chain length was indeed around 6, his findings challenged Gladwell's emphasis on the superimportance of connectors. Watts found that while these highly connected hubs existed, most messages, something like 95%, actually reached their target without going through one of these hubs. His conclusion was that social epidemics might be less dependent on a few specific superspreaders and more about the overall connectivity of the network in reaching a critical mass of easily influenced average people. He argued that if finding a few key influencers was all it took, advertising would be far more consistently successful than it actually is. It suggested the process might be more random and less predictable than the law of the few implies.
So maybe it's less about finding Paul Revere and more about just reaching enough people at the right time.
That's one interpretation of Watts's findings. Yes, it complicates the simple elegance of the law of the few. And then you had economists like Stephen Levitt of Freakonomics fame, offering completely different primary explanations for the dramatic crime drop in NYC and other U.S. cities in the 90s. Levitt pointed to factors like a massive increase in the number of police officers nationwide, changes in drug markets, like the decline of crack cocaine, and, most controversially, the delayed effects of the legalization of abortion following Roe v. Wade in 1973. His argument was that legal abortion led to fewer unwanted children being born into poverty and high-risk environments, meaning that by the 1990s, there were simply fewer young men in the demographic cohort most likely to commit crimes. Because crime dropped nationally, not just in cities that adopted broken windows policing, Levitt argued these broader factors were more significant than specific local policing strategies. So these debates show that while the tipping point provides a compelling and useful framework, it's likely not the only explanation for complex social phenomena. Reality is usually a mix of many factors.
Absolutely. It seems the real value isn't in seeing the book as the definitive final answer, but as a powerful lens, a set of tools for thinking about how change happens. Despite the critiques and the evolving understanding, how can we apply these core insights today, especially now in our hyper-connected digital world?
That's the key takeaway, I think. The framework remains incredibly relevant, maybe even more so now. Think about the digital age. Social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, they've put social contagion on steroids. Tipping points can literally happen in minutes or hours now, not weeks or months. A single viral video, a trending hashtag, a meme that explodes. These often follow the tipping point principles almost perfectly. You see clear connectors, influencers with huge followings, Mavens, people sharing expert takes or niche knowledge, and Salesmen, charismatic creators whose enthusiasm is infectious. The platforms themselves provide the context, and algorithms are designed to identify and amplify sticky content. The speed and scale are different, but the underlying dynamics Gladwell described are arguably more visible than ever.
So the internet hasn't broken the rules, just accelerated them.
You could definitely argue that. And the potential applications for positive change are huge if we understand these levers. In public health, for instance, organizations increasingly try to identify trusted local connectors and mavens within communities, maybe community health workers, religious leaders, local bloggers, to spread messages about vaccination, hygiene, or disease prevention. They recognize that information is far more likely to stick and lead to action if it comes from a known, trusted source within the local context. In urban planning, while the debate around broken windows policing continues, the broader idea of the power of context influences design. Creating public spaces that encourage positive social interaction, increase eyes on the street, reduce anonymity, and foster a sense of community ownership can demonstrably reduce crime and improve quality of life. It's about shaping the environment to tip behavior in a positive direction. And think about huge challenges like climate change. Activists and organizations are constantly grappling with how to make the message sticky enough to cut through the noise, how to empower persuasive salesmen and connect with key connectors, and how to frame the urgency of the context to mobilize action on a scale that can actually tip the balance towards sustainability.
It definitely provides a framework for tackling big problems. Can these ideas also apply on a more personal level, like for individual change or growth?
I think so, absolutely. The tipping point can be a really useful lens for thinking about personal transformation. We often get overwhelmed trying to make huge changes in our lives. But the book suggests maybe we should look for the small levers. What's the one tiny habit change? Stickiness make it easy and repeatable that could cascade into bigger things. Who is the key person, connector, or maven in your network whose advice or support could unlock progress? What's the change you could make to your immediate environment? Power of context, like removing temptations or joining a supportive group that would make desired behaviors easier. If you want to get fit, maybe the tipping point isn't vowing to run a marathon tomorrow. Maybe it's finding one fitness maven friend for advice, joining one small supportive class, rule of a 150 context, and committing to one tiny sticky habit like putting your running shoes by the door every night. It encourages focusing on small strategic actions rather than just willpower. At the end of the day, I think the enduring power of Gladwell's work is that it offers a sense of agency and optimism. It counters the feeling that the world is too big and complex to change. It suggests that change is possible, and that it often hinges on precise, thoughtful actions that can cascade into profound outcomes. It's a reminder that the world isn't fixed, it's not immovable. And with, as Gladwell memorably puts it, the slightest push in just the right place, it could be tipped. It encourages us to look for those leverage points, both in society and in our own lives.
That's a really empowering message to end on. The idea that small, smart actions can ripple outwards makes you wonder. Considering everything we've talked about, the rules, the examples, the complexities, even Gladwell's own rethinking what small, maybe overlooked detail in your own environment, your network, your daily routine might actually hold far more potential influence than you realize. What little thing, if nudged in the right way, might be waiting to be tipped and make a surprisingly big difference? Something for all of us to think about. This was it on today's book, guys. Kindly subscribe and follow us for more such insights on various books, and also do not forget to join our social media community to stay in touch and get updated.